The Government Accountability Office will look at former Trump administration political appointees that switched to career jobs. Democrats in Congress asked for details on Burrowing in back in the fall. Jeff Neal's former Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. He's chairman at the National Academy of Public Administration. He's writing about Burrowing in on his blog, chiefhro.com. Jeff, welcome. It's great to see you again. How bad is this problem, and does it look like it's worse or better in the aftermath of the Trump administration than previous administrations?
Well, burrowing in, Francis, is something that happens in every agency, even though every agency denies that it ever happened. It does. We don't know how much worse it might be right now than it has been in previous administrations. Anecdotally, we're hearing that there were a fair number of Trump appointees who burrowed into various types of jobs, anything from boards and commissions down to GS-12s and 13s in agencies. So I think until they're able to get in there and get a good look at what kinds of personnel actions are taken, we're not sure exactly how bad it might be right now. But it is something that happens in a lot of agents, in a lot of administrations. It just might be worse this time than it typically is.
I know historically it's hard to compare what happened in the previous administration to administrations before it. But you write in your most recent piece, the belief is that burrowed-in employees are there to undermine the new administration. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought that I've heard is that these people get into the government and they find out, number one, it's a good gig, and number two, it's a fulfilling gig. Do you have a sense of, historically, which of the burrowing in can be attributed to one or the other of those schools of thought, Jeff?
More often than not, people who burrowed in are people who just wanted a government job after their appointment, and they weren't doing it for ideological reasons. When I started at DHS as Chief Human Capital Officer, we had, I think, 17 or 18 Bush administration folks who had burrowed in, and I got a letter from the chair of one of the House committees saying, please take a look at this. And so I personally took a look at it. And what I found was that, for the most part, there was nothing wrong with any of these appointments. They followed the rules, the people were qualified. And then so nothing happened to them. And then after that, they really didn't do anything to try to undermine the Obama administration's policies in DHS. So in that case, there were people who burrowed in. Yes, they burrowed in. Would they have gotten the jobs if they hadn't been there as politicals? Probably not. Did they get hired illegally? No, they got hired legally. And they stayed. I don't know how long most of them stayed, but they stayed around and they did their jobs. And so it wasn't some horrible thing that happened at that point. But the Bush administration also wasn't known for hiring people who were hostile to the mission of the agency, as the Trump administration was in some cases.
You write in this piece, the types of problems that would make an appointment invalid are things like cooking the process to ensure the burrowed-in employee was determined to be among the best qualified, or failing to follow the requirements of a particular hiring authority. Is it possible to fake those things? I would think those things are when someone goes back and looks, they'd be pretty obvious, Jeff.
A lot of times people get caught if they try something like that. When they're cooking the process, they're doing things like tailoring the qualification requirements of the position to the resume of the person they're trying to hire. And you can't do that. And what they'll do sometimes is they'll tailor it a little too close. And you'll see that the qualification requirements even follow the same order that things are listed in the person's resume. So normally when you see something where somebody's been playing around with the process and committing a prohibited personnel practice when they do that, you'll find that it is often very obvious. And so it seems like when people are trying to be crooked, they also seem to turn off the part of their brain that helps them be smart. And so you tend to find things that people do that are crooked and stupid.
You write in this piece about 3 places that the Biden administration should look for potential abuses: hires whose appointments are not complete, hires who've been appointed for the first time to career positions, and hires whose previous service allows them to not serve a probationary period. Is there one of those 3, Jeff, that you think is potentially more problematic, harder to find issues with, or something like that than others?
Well, the ones that are harder to do anything about are people who are not on probation because they've been in career jobs before. So those kinds of people, you really have to treat them like any other federal employee. They have to be given a chance to perform. If they perform, then they stay around. The other folks, people whose appointment hasn't been completed, they could just cancel the job offer in those cases. Courts ruled after the Reagan administration did a retroactive hiring freeze in 1981 that federal job offers are not contracts. And so they can just say, be gone with you. We're not going to give you a job after all. The people who are on probation, if they mess up, and mess up is a pretty broad term when you're on probation, those folks could just be terminated, and they have very little recourse on a termination if they're in probation. So those folks are not a big worry.
Jeff Neal, thanks very much for joining me as always. Great to have you.
Good to be here.